every moment you're with your kid is an opportunity to say to them, you can do this, and I'm here for you.
Welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast, where we connect, engage, and empower fathers to be the best dads they can be for their families and communities. And now, your hosts are Bruce Stapleton and Pastor Eli Williams.
Welcome aboard, everybody, to the 32nd episode of the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams, and on our podcast today, we have informative conversations. We share fatherhood stories and encourage and inspire one another along our fathering journeys. And we are so delighted today to have as our guest, Barbara Coloroso. Now, you know, we always have men, but today we've got this wonderful woman, and she's just the first of many that we're going to be having on the podcast. Barbara is an internationally recognized speaker and author in the areas of parenting, teaching, school discipline, nonviolent conflict resolution, reconciliatory justice. It just goes on and on and on. She's an educational consultant for school districts, the medical and business community, and so much more. I met her this past spring at a fatherhood conference in Los Angeles, and I am so delighted that she could join us today. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Pastor Eli. It's just a real joy and honor to be here to talk about such an important topic. The importance of men in our young people's life as mentors, as parents, as guides.
Yes, ma'am. And we're so happy that you could come and bring your perspectives on all of this. On the Fathering Strong podcast, we'd like to start with our guests' own personal fatherhood stories. And although usually our guests are men, we know that everybody has a fatherhood story. So let's dive right in, Barbara. Tell us about your relationship with your father.
Yes, I am the second of 5 children. My older sister and I were a little over 11 months apart, so we were very close. And then I had another sister, and then another sister, and then 10 years later, a brother. And I was born in New York, and we moved to Colorado after my father's brother, who had served with him in Africa during World War II, married a war bride and invited my father to come to a very small town, Fort Morgan, from New York City and Staten Island to do TV and radio when TV was just starting up. And my father never talked about the war experiences at all. And it was only later when I was in high school and he brought out an album of his African experience. He was in Egypt. He used to say, Rommel was with us. I said, no, that's the other side. He said he was with us every night, you know. And so all of his brothers and his sister served in the military. And they all had the aftermath of war that they lived with, but never spoke about. As I was growing up, and I related it in my first book, Kids Are Worth It, that I came from a family where alcoholism was an issue with my dad, and living through that. And then it's interesting because my own children did not know my dad during that phase in his life. And so they saw this very gentle soul as he aged and got totally removed from alcohol, thanks to a boss he had who said, look, you want to work, you got to quit. And so they got to know a grandfather very differently than I knew my dad. And so we were real grateful to that. There were a lot of things that was good, too. When you look over the years, things my dad taught me, how to fly a kite, how to plumb a wall. We were very poor, and we lived in a log house and wanted to move a wall. And so my dad taught me at 10 to put a nail in the wall and hang a string with a nail at the bottom to learn how to straighten a wall. He was also an electrician. And so I can hang lights as a result of my dad. I have no problem putting a fan in. But there are points where I say, that's not my area of expertise. Let's not burn the house down. But he gave me all of those gifts, and I am forever grateful for the gifts that he gave me in his own broken state that we did not recognize from soldiers in World War II. He was Army Air Force before Air Force broke away. He dealt with the planes, but he also saw his own brothers in combat as well. So that, I think, shaped a lot of what my father gave to us that he didn't always plan to give to us. Mm. And he made up for it in the grandparenting role that he played. And that's why I think it's so important that we recognize that role as well, because my kids and all the other kids' grandbabies love their grandpa. And it was only when they were in their adult years that one day my dad, my daughter's graduation, got really upset about mushrooms. And my aunt and my mom were there, and they had married brothers. And I said, kids, that's the kind of trauma that I grew up with. And I'm so glad you never had to see it except this one time. And my father apologized profusely. It was one of those sparking moments over mushrooms, But they were very close to their grandpa.
Very good. Yes, grandparents are wonderful. I like to say it's a chance to parent again, using all the lessons that you learned, all the mistakes you made raising your own children.
Or never had as a tool in your toolbox to begin with.
Yeah.
And how watching your children develop their own tools. I mean, I began to write books on parenting and to lecture and learn myself. But there were tools I had to throw out of my toolbox and tools that didn't exist in my toolbox to put in for me to parent my children. And I told my kids, your job is to do a better job than we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. So let's talk about now your own parenting experiences. You have 3 grown children. Is that right?
I do. Anna Marie and Joseph, they're like day, night, and afternoon. I had 3 and 3.5 years. And the first 6 years were interesting. But after that, they really became their own unique individuals in special ways and good friends. Now, mind you, during the middle school years, when Joseph was in middle school, which is the unable to be an adult and unable to be a kid, wanting desperately to be both, that he annoyed his sisters tremendously. Then when he got to high school and joined lacrosse and started bringing home some good looking lacrosse players, they kind of turned around about, Joe isn't so bad. But they really are like day, night, and afternoon from the day they were born. And I think if we can honor that and recognize that they become who they need to become, not necessarily what we might mistakenly want them to become.
Yeah.
It's that allowing them to be all they can be. And my husband and I are like day and night in some areas. We met. I should give you a little background.
Yes, please do.
I'm a former Franciscan nun. Obviously
former. Is that right?
Yes, obviously former, with a husband and 3 kids. And no, I didn't marry a priest. And yes, I met him after I left the convent. So that answers Catholics' questions who are listening. But I met Don at a Cesar Chavez protest march for migrant workers. And so we both came. I had marched in Milwaukee in the civil rights movement as a nun. And then when I met Don, there was something that we connected with in that regards. We both were in special ed, working with kids with special needs. And he went through that career path and then worked with migrants and refugees before he retired. And so that brought us together. The interesting thing in his family, he also dealt with alcoholism in his family. And so we had that connection. And what we said we would not do is drink. I mean, that was not going to be a part of our culture. And he came from an Italian family where wine is a staple, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We made that decision thinking that would shield our kids. What we recognized, as many fathers will recognize, is that some of those old tools are still there.
Yeah.
And that you have to replace them with something healthier. And we both worked on that. And we have wonderful adult children. And I had said to the two girls when they were having their babies, they were young adults at the point, is there anything you would not want us to do with your children that we did to you? I always include my husband in that, so it's not all the blame on me.
Right.
And my oldest said, I'll have to think about that. My middle one said, yes, so fast. And I, whoa. Right. Yeah. And she said, I said, well, what is it? She said, do you remember when we were young and we would be out in public and one of us would be acting up? You used to grab us by the arm and hold it tight. And my heart sunk, because that is exactly what my mother had done. I was doing unconsciously what my mother had done. And so I said, I promise you, I will never do that with your children, my grandchildren. And so we had to look at that. And for Dawn, it was taking more time to listen. Mm-hmm. To what the grandchildren were saying and not be so quick, as he had found in his own growing up, that he was expected to be and say certain things. And he had to recognize that these young, beautiful children were their own unique selves. And we are there first as parents to help them grow. But once they reach puberty, we have to move out of that role. Yeah. And we have to become their mentor, their model and guide. And then in adulthood, that transition, if you have been able to connect with your children and let them be who they are and make their own mistakes and helping them by saying, I'm here for you. That in adulthood, we can hopefully be their good friend, because we're going to need them as friends when they decide which nursing home we're going into.
Yeah, that's thinking ahead. Well, listen, when we come back after this break, I'm going to ask you about where your passion for kids came from. I kind of got a glimpse of it just now as you were sharing your story, but much more on that. We're going to go deeper after we come back from this break. This is the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams. My guest today is Barbara Coloroso, and we'll be back right after this.
We dads and father figures need each other. We need a safe, non-judgmental place to share our stories, challenges, heartaches, and joys. Fathering Strong is just such a place. A new online community of connected, engaged, and empowered fathers. Learn more at www.fatheringstrong.com.
Welcome back to the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams. Barbara Coloroso is our guest today on the Fathering Strong podcast. And Barbara, you are an internationally recognized speaker and consultant on parenting and teaching, among other things. You've written several books, and parenting and children are common themes in your books. Your website is titled KidsAreWorthIt.com. Where does your passion for kids come from?
Well, I remember at 13 getting a job as a lifeguard. Now, you can't be a true WSA lifeguard until you're 15. Then I'm 77, so we'll get that out there. And I started in the kiddie pool, where you might not think that'd be a hard job, but parents would be chatting with one another and their little kid would be floating face down in the pool. And we had to go over to them and say, your kid, we just grabbed him up, need to watch him. And I really enjoyed the younger cousins as well. And then when I was 15 and was getting my WSI, I had a friend who had a sister who had special needs. And he said, I wish she could be in the swimming lessons that were offered in our town free. And all the lifeguards would teach those lessons. So I went to my boss and I said, do you suppose, this is how ignorant I was, do you suppose we can start swimming lessons for handicapped kids? He said, sure. And we had a sign up in the local newspaper. And handicapped kids to me was this friend's sister. We had kids who were deaf, physically handicapped, kids who were visually handicapped, kids who had mental, we used to call it mental retardation, but a disability. And it was a wonderful opportunity for the parents and all of us lifeguards who were experiencing things we never had thought in our wildest dreams. Just not watching somebody not drowned in lifeguarding. We were teaching kids who would thrive through their disabilities and help one another. And then the reason I went to the Franciscan Order in Milwaukee is they had the St. Coletta School, the school for handicapped kids, where Rose Kennedy was at, John F. Kennedy's sister, who was lobotomized at puberty. At the behest of her father. And so that was my experience there. I also worked at the school for the deaf children and just really enjoyed growing with them, truly. They offered me so much in terms of resilience and getting through horrible situations that they would figure it out. And as long as we were there to support them, like helping them float the first time, and then they would take off. So yes, that passion has continued for me. And watching my own children. And I got to say, I may have had all the university coursework and stuff, but when we get upset, our mother's words roll off our tongue or our father's hand goes to hit, and we have to back off and say, no, I need a new tool for that toolbox. And we can do that. And I want my kids to understand they can too.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I really, I mean, your passion just flows from you. And it's easy to see that this is a heartfelt work for you. Now, we believe that children need male nurturance as much as they need nurturing mothers. What are some tips that you would give to our dads who are watching today when it comes to being a nurturer of their children?
If we can remember, as moms and especially as fathers, that every kid needs 6 critical life messages every day. And the way you express them will be uniquely yours to each one of your children in a very unique way. I believe in you. I trust in you. I know you can handle this. You're listened to. You're cared for. And you're very important to me. Fathers are often very busy. And often just making sure there's food on the table. And living through their own adult issues from their own families. And I have to say, we as moms need to be very aware that we need to give that space to dads and be inviting with them and not demanding, but inviting. You know, let's go together to that game or hinting at things. We can nurture the fathers too. And as grandmother, I make it a point to make sure the fathers in my grandchildren's lives know that I know they can do it. Affirming to a dad, you can do this. and
Yeah.
making sure that there's time in their life that they have the kids' time, affection, and a sense of optimism. I call it the Tao of parenting. Parenting is not an efficient profession. It takes lots of time. And I'm not talking that quality time you read about in the magazines. You know, we say, oh, we're going to go to the zoo. And the kid says, I don't want to go to the zoo. We're going to the zoo and you're going to have a good time. And no, you cannot invite your friends. It's quality time with your dad. No, that's not it. It's those moments.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything big. It's moments in their lives. When a child walks in and you say, you're busy on your computer, or you're busy doing some kind of woodwork, or you're cleaning up a mess, and you say, how's your day, kid? And he goes, fine. This is not fine. But if you're too busy to notice what he's saying to you without the words, we have to remember we speak 5 ways: our bodies, our face, our eyes, our tone of voice, and what we actually say. Only 20% of what you and I, as mothers and fathers, communicate to kids is done with words. The other 80% is what we're doing when those words are being spoken or not spoken. You know, it's like a little 3rd grade boy had a teacher who didn't like 3rd grade boys. Kid nailed her on it and said, you don't like 3rd grade boys. The teacher looked down and said, that's not true. I like 3rd grade boys. And the kid looked back up and said, would you tell your face that then? So as fathers, what is your face saying? When you say, how was your day? Are you really tuned in to watching that body that's speaking something besides fine? When the tear is there and we ask questions, instead of asking questions, to say, talk to me about it. Tell me about it. I want fathers to know that children need to believe that they can tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and you will be there for them. You don't always have to like what they did, but you're there for them. To be able to say, you can get through this, and I'm here to be for you, to help you get through it. I'm not going to do it for you. That's rescuing. That's what Jim Fay called the helicopter parent syndrome, where we rush in and solve it. But I'm also not going to be brick wall, where it's my way or the highway, and that's not listening to your kid, and you will do what I tell you to do. And look, you really messed up. I can't trust you anymore. No, it's that flexibility with a backbone as a father, where you have flexibility that you don't get from a rigid brick wall, but it also gives you an environment as a father where you can have situations that have flexibility and invite responsibility from your kids. See, it isn't all on you as a father to do it. It's an engagement with a child who's going to teach you how to be a good parent.
Yeah.
And, that engagement, whether it's for so many fathers today, it's not full time. Right. But full time just means 24 hours a day. Every moment you're with your kid is an opportunity to say to them, you can do this, and I'm here for you.
Yes. And it's important for mothers to understand that male nurturance may not look the same as a mother's nurturance. That doesn't mean it's bad or that it's toxic. No, it just means that it's coming from a man, but it's just as loving. It just doesn't look always the same.
But I got to tell you, between 2 fathers or 2, it doesn't look the same. You know, one father will parent in one way, partly because of that toolbox we have up here. And I think as mothers and fathers, we can be in this together by being willing to say to one another that we believe in one another too, that we can get through it. I remember once my daughter came running in, our oldest, and she said, Mom, Dad said I couldn't roller skate. It was skates and not blades. Roller skate in our cul-de-sac. We lived in a cul-de-sac where there was only one entrance and people had to stop at that, a stop sign. So it was safe for them to be playing in the street, right? Mm-hmm. And she had asked her dad if she could go with her friend and roller skate. And he said no. And we had a thing as parents that whoever you ask first, the second one will back them up. And so she came in and said, Dad won't let me. And I said, hon, you asked the wrong person first. Kids know which parent to ask for what. They get good at that. But I was curious. And I said, so right now you can't, but I'm going to talk to your dad and see his reasoning, because he must have a reason. And when we talked it over, we sat down with her and we said, Anna, when you go to Grandma and Grandpa's house in Denver, do you play in the street? She said, oh, no, we'd get run over, because it's a very busy street outside Grandma and Grandpa's house. And Dawn said, that's why I said no so quickly. I didn't think about the situation we're in now. I thought about my own. And I had to say, when we go to Grandma and Grandpa's in Log Lane Village, there are dirt roads and cows occasionally crossing. And all the kids played in the street. So we had to talk to her about why each one of us would have made a different decision. And we have to be tuned into what is the now with these kids, not our past. And so she then said, Dad, since ours is not like the Denver, can I roller skate? And he said, yes. So, but I could have come in and said, there's no reason she can't play out there. It's safe. What were you thinking? Why berate the person? We just had a standard thing that if it wasn't life-threatening, morally threatening, or unhealthy, we would, whoever you asked first, the other would support. And for those who are separated or divorced, don't talk bad about the dad, or don't talk bad about the mom. Kids will figure it out.
Yep.
And we need to be there and sometimes amplify the gifts that the kid might not be seeing right there. And then when they come home, dads can say, talk to me about your visit instead of, how'd it go with your mother? No, talk to me about it. And if they slam it, say, okay, you need a little break, but I'm here to talk with you. We need to be able to be open, but not bad-mouthing.
That's good. So good. We're going to take our final time out, Barbara. And when we come back, let's talk a little bit about, let's have you share some of your wisdom about grieving when it comes to being a parent and dealing with grieving. This is the Fathering Strong podcast, and I am just tickled to have Barbara Coloroso as my guest today. And we'll have more with her after this brief timeout.
Do you know a new father who could benefit from a basic introduction to healthy fathering principles? POPS 101, a free online course consisting of 4 one-hour sessions in English or Spanish, could be perfect for him. POPS 101 lays out practical steps toward becoming the protector, order keeper, provider, and stabilizer his child needs. Learn more at urbanlight.org.
Welcome back. Barbara Coloroso is my guest today, and we've talked about many things, and it seems like we've only scratched the surface of this woman's wisdom. And we appreciate you being here with us, Barbara. You've written about parenting through crisis, helping kids in times of loss, grief, and change. We have a situation here locally where a school community is grieving because of just horseplay, basically. That resulted in a young man being shot, and he died at the hand of his friend. And so it's a touchy situation, very, very tragic. How do you go about, let me ask it this way. What advice would you give a parent whose child is grieving, mourning because they've lost a classmate, and the other classmate is in big trouble? How would you counsel them?
Well, in Judaism, when they are sitting in grieving, they have a very good philosophy, and that is that you be present to the person grieving and let them talk first, because then you'll know what they need. They might want to talk about good times about the person who died, wonderful things about that person. They may want to vent their anger at this horrific tragedy, the frustration about it. So just to sit down with it and say, I'm here, because they're the ones that need to grieve in a way that you and I don't. We're sad, we're frustrated, but they're intimately connected with both the person who caused the tragedy and the person who is now dead. So to be present, that's a whole mix of emotions. And the first thing we do is to be present to them. The next thing we have to recognize is that we all grieve differently. You know, Kubler-Ross had the stages of grief for people dying who were terminally ill. And that's different than the passages of grief in any kind of loss in our young people's lives. There are basically three passages all of us will go through during this time. The first is the oh no of it all. In fact, very often kids will be saying, oh no, they just want to wake up from the nightmare. They can't believe it really happened. That passage usually lasts about 7 days, because that's about the ancients knew 7 days. Now we have to get it over in 3, you know?
Yeah.
No, the 7 days of being able to do, oh no. And you're basically in shock. How else can a parent buy a coffin for a kid? You have to be in shock to do that. There's nothing logical about it. It hurts so bad. So that shock is there in its own blessing. Then after the first passage, it's the intense sorrow. That sorrow can last 6 months to 2 years, where everything is steel cold gray. Kids go back to school, which they will need to do, and they may have a memorial of some kind. And I would not rush a permanent memorial. That needs to take time. We Irish, I'm Black Irish, and we grieve for a year, and the headstone doesn't get placed until that year, when you will have gone through all the important personal passages of a person's life and all the holidays and memorial times that kids will go through. However, First Nation peoples have a saying: if it's a catastrophic loss or a sudden loss like this one was, it may take 2 times 4 seasons. So recognize that at birthday parties, there is an empty chair. There's somebody you wanted. Don't not speak of that person. And so notice that your kids, and if you have 3 kids in your family, one intimately knew that person, the other 2 knew them from the school, those passages will go differently. But there's the 3. The third is 6 months to 2 years, is sadness that is tempered with joy, with getting on with your own life. And you think, whew, got through that. Nah, a song can bring it back. Mm-hmm. A graduation can bring it back. A birthday that's not happening can bring it back. But one young boy who had leukemia and then had it come back, he said to his dad, will there be joy again? He said there was joy and that sadness when you were finally in remission. We're here for the next joy too. It's being that optimist that there will be joy in the morning. But to say to your children during that time, I'm here. And my 3 kids, best art teacher, was killed in an accident, but my son was the closest to him as an artist. And when a teacher came in and said that he had died, and they had counselors at the school, Joe ran out of the school and ran home. And the principal called my husband, who was at home at that time, and he said, your son has run. He's left school. And he said, I know, he's in the garage throwing pots. He would make a pot on the wheel, throw it, make a pot on the wheel and throw it. That's what he was doing. And we sat with him, talked with him about it, let him talk. How could this happen? But pretty soon, word got around in the school that the art teacher that knew this other art teacher well, and she came at lunch to talk to Joe. They could bond. And she said, can other kids come up? Sure. After school, lots of kids came to our house And with Joe and the other art teacher, grieving. You know what my job was and my husband's job was? Get the food and be quiet. Notice that background we need to play. We're there for them for what they need. That's what your community needs, is that those of us who are adults and all of us have been through some kind of loss. The pandemic alone was a major loss for many, is to be there and bring the food and then be present for what your children need. If one says, I really don't want to go to the memorial, I can't yet, honor that. If the other wants to bring something, go over to somebody's, honor that. Listen to our young people. They don't know how to deal with this any more than we do, except for this is what I'm really feeling and this is what I need. Now, we also, can I mention that at kidsareworthit.com, there are handouts on grieving. There are handouts on just discipline and parenting. Please, they're free. Go and download them. But the one on Parenting Through Crisis, which is my favorite book of all of them that I've written, because it's such a heavy topic, and we've all been there in some way or the other. There is those passages of grief, but also when grieving is no longer good mourning, to make sure your child isn't hanging on and may need some help. Wanting to be with the dead person is a real feeling, but making plans is serious.
Yes.
And so we need to be tuned into that. And most importantly, to not expect it to go away. We want it to. Just and get on with happy things. But it's those three passages that we have to honor. And know that kids, come graduation this year, are going to go right back into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's normal. It's a part of life.
Yeah. And the kid that pulled the trigger is going to have a lot of healing to do as well.
And it not only healing, in that book, I actually talk about a young girl who was fooling around and hit a truck with her classmates in the back, and one died and one was paralyzed. Yeah. And people wanted that fist of vengeance, and others wanted, oh, she didn't mean it. Neither serve a kid well. Instead, what the judge did was restorative practices. She had to own what she had done, figure out how she could keep it from happening again, and heal with the people she had truly harmed. And she had to make restitution to the family of the man in the truck that died. She had to work at a rehab center to help other people who were paralyzed. And the fascinating thing was the father of the dead boy was at the rehab center at the same time as she was doing some required service. Yeah. And he put his arms around her and said, I'm here for you. We need to be there for them. We don't need that fist of vengeance. And we also can't rescue them, and they won't heal. What we need is the arm of restraint and the arm of compassion in order for them to heal, be held accountable for what they've done. They have that as a thread in their tapestry the rest of their life, but it is not the whole tapestry. And we as a community can't be out for revenge. We can't be out to punish and make them pay. They're already paying. Right. But to say that is that thread in your tapestry.
Yeah.
It will impact you, but it's not your whole tapestry. Because every kid, and I work with young offenders, every kid is worth it. The time, the energy, the resources it takes to help them become all they can become.
The website again is
www.kidsareworthit, all spelled out, .com. It's a website. Yeah. The website there. And at the very top is a topic that many parents are struggling with today, is a 70-page electronic summary of my bully book for any of them dealing with bullying, with their own children being targeted at school. We are living in a toxic climate right now of
Mhm.
hateful rhetoric and
Yeah.
mean and cruel. And if your children are experiencing that, we need to know how we can be supportive of them. And it's written for moms and dads. And what to do if your child comes to you and say they've been targeted, somebody laughed at their hair, somebody was mean and cruel, how you can do that. But that's at the very top of that website, and it just says Essential Guide. You can download it and share it with teachers if they dismiss what has happened to your son or daughter. If they say, oh, boys will be boys, girls just want to be mean. No. Bullying is about contempt for another human being. And we can't allow that to flourish because every kid, again, matters.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Well,
We really appreciate you being our guest today on the Fathering Strong podcast. So helpful. It was just a delightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Eli. I appreciate you asking me to do it for fathers.
Oh, we're going to ask you again.
I'll come back.
Thank
Especially
you
on
so
issues
much.
like discipline as opposed to punishment or rescuing.
Excellent. Yes.
We often don't know what to do in a way that serves our kids well and helps them get on their way.
Absolutely.
Thank
Well,
you.
that wraps up today's installment of the Fathering Strong podcast. We want to also remind you that fatheringstrong.com is just chock full of resources, including our weekly Fathering Strong blog posts, our devotionals, videos, fatherhood courses, and much more. So explore it today. That's fatheringstrong.com. Thanks again to Barbara Coloroso. We really appreciate her taking the time to talk with us today. And thank you, friends, for being with us. Next time, our guest will be Sean Walton Sr. Sean is an inspirational storytelling speaker, writer, consultant, and community advocate. He delights in speaking to organizations and helping them with things like fatherhood, mentoring, youth, and leadership development. So join us then, won't you? And that's all for today, friends. May the Lord bless you as you give your child what no one else on earth can. That is your fully developed father love. That is Fathering Strong. Bye now.
Fathering Strong is powered by Urban Light Ministries, a not-for-profit organization serving the needs of families and children for nearly 30 years. Your support helps us continue turning the hearts of fathers to their children while meeting some of the immediate critical needs of struggling families with small children. Contributions of all sizes are welcomed at www.urbanlight.org.
The Fathering Strong podcast is a production of Urban Light Ministries, with technical assistance from the Momentum Group, and Harold Rayford provides the theme music. So thank you for listening.